Serial killers are a staple in all forms of media, whether it be our favorite horror games or our favorite slasher films. Something about a basic human being that somehow defies what a normal person should be capable of just really creates a terrifying experience that is not like anything else. Well, on the 9th day of the 31 days of Halloween, we're taking a look at the most disturbing serial killers in horror games. Whether it's their motivation, the way that they kill their victims, or just their insane personalities. These are the 10 serial killers from horror games that keep us up at night. For today's video, I'm only looking at killers that were murdering victims before they gain any sort of supernatural powers. Also discussing the killers themselves and the events surrounding their backstory. Clearly there will be some spoilers regarding some of the entries on today's list, so feel free to use the timestamps to skip horror games that you don't want to be spoiled on. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Finally, this video is officially sponsored by G Fuel, so if you're looking for ways to support the channel, consider picking up your favorite tub of G Fuel using the link below or the code NerdSpaceGames at checkout to save up to 20% off your next order. Anyway, my name is Ruben with NerdSpace Games, and this is my top 10 most disturbing serial killers in horror games. Let's get it. Number 10, the slashers, Dead by Daylight. So I wanted to start off this list by combining a ton of different iconic serial killers from a certain asymmetrical horror game, Dead by Daylight. This game features all kinds of killers, both supernatural and straight up slashers. Obviously for this entry we'll be ignoring all the supernatural ones, but in terms of the slashers, you have so many to choose from. You have the licensed IPs like Ghostface and the original characters like the Trapper. Looking back at what these killers did before they became tools for the entity to use, clearly all of them had extremely disturbing pasts that led them to becoming monsters used to kill survivors and feed them to the entity. Again, I'm really combining a ton of different characters for this spot, and honestly, you can go one step farther by including other asymmetrical horror game slashers in this spot as well, like Leatherface and his family from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre game. Number 9, Albert Lester, Resident Evil Outbreak. Not to be confused with Albert Wesker, Al Lester was once a doctor who was responsible for saving lives, who then became one of the most underrated villains of the RE series when he became the serial killer known as the Axeman in Resident Evil Outbreak. See, when his wife became sick, Al Lester began conducting illegal human trials using the T-virus, of course he did, in the attempt to save her. Ultimately, as you would expect, she died and the virus turned her into a flesh-eating zombie. Unfortunately, things didn't stop there, as Lester's wife was eventually devoured by a large man-eating plant infused with the T-virus, and Lester believed that this plant was his wife reborn. This sick mentality of his would lead to Lester becoming the Axeman, in which he would capture residents of Raccoon City that found their way into the Arklay Mountains near the now abandoned hospital, chop them up, and then feed them to the plant, therefore keeping his wife alive, or so he believed. Over time, Lester's exposure to the plant would enhance him with healing abilities and strength, yet he would still have his mind and personality intact, which was different from your typical zombie created from the T-virus. During the events of the flashback scenario of Resident Evil Outbreak, Lester would hunt the players as a stalker enemy who, in true stalker enemy fashion, can't be killed until the final cutscene of the game. Number 8, Piggsy, Manhunt. To this day, there's not many video games out there that can match the same brutality of Rockstar's take on the horror genre, Manhunt. In this game, you play as Cash, a convict on death row who's been forced to participate in a snuff film. While Cash himself could also be considered for this list as a serial killer considering the amount of people he kills, and in some pretty horrifying ways mind you, the title of most disturbing serial killer in this game goes to the horrifying Piggsy instead. While Piggsy doesn't get a lot of screen time as he's not the main antagonist of the game, the little time that he does get definitely makes a mark on us, the player. As one of Starweather's other projects that was used in multiple snuff films before he became a liability due to his animalistic behavior, Piggsy has brutally killed a lot of people prior to the events of the game. Throughout his time as Starweather's character, Piggsy slowly grew more and more insane until he eventually just lost it. His personality would change into something that wasn't human anymore, as he would become more beast than man. He wears a pig head to cover his face, and after being fed human flesh for so long, Piggsy eventually became a cannibalistic maniac. When Cash eventually does face off against him, Piggsy wields a chainsaw, and because of this, we get one of the most intense stealth sequences throughout the entire game. Yeah, just hearing his grunts and the fact that he's a big, naked man wearing a pig head is enough to make any of us tremble in fear. But when you add in the chainsaw, yeah, all bets are off. Number 7, Hector Munday, The Devil in Me. Hector Munday was once an FBI agent who was tasked with investigating multiple cases featuring some of the most notorious serial killers. During his time as an FBI agent though, he eventually interrogated one of these killers, and when he died, a switch was flipped, and Munday became obsessed with serial killers, especially the real-life killer H.H. Holmes. You know, America's first serial killer. I won't dive into the whole history of H.H. Holmes and Munday's backstory, as that could literally take all day, but long story short, Munday was influenced by what Holmes did, and he built a hotel full of traps in which he then lured victims to it and tortured them and murdered them in various ways. Essentially, he was Jigsaw, except he never gave his victims the opportunity to escape with their lives. Yeah, even when they won the challenge or task that he put in front of them, he would just kill them. Munday then created the persona of Dumet, as he would dress like his inspiration, H.H. Holmes, while he tormented his victims. Munday also had an obsession with mannequins and animatronics ever since he turned his late mother into one. In fact, this was his main motivation, as he wanted to locate the perfect specimens for more animatronics for his hotel, and most of the victims would later be used to build his lifelike and very disturbing animatronics. Munday did this for years, as he killed nearly 200 people before he was stopped by the protagonist of the game. As it turns out, Munday doesn't die like we thought at the end of the game, and it's revealed that he is still alive and well, and once again luring people into his house of horrors. Number 6, Stefano Valentini, The Evil Within 2. Valentini shares a lot with Munday actually, as they both view death as a form of art. For Munday, it was the act of murder and the animatronics created from his victims that he viewed as art. In Valentini's case though, he was a photographer that became obsessed with capturing death with a camera at the exact moment it happened. This obsession started while he was a war photographer, and one day he accidentally captured the exact moment that his comrade died from the same explosion that took his eye. After seeing this image, Valentini became obsessed with death and the way it was depicted in photos, and, as I'm sure you guessed, it led him down a dark and twisted path. Eventually, Valentini began to hire fashion models and lure them into his studio. However, unknowing to them, Valentini saw beauty in one thing: death. So he began brutally murdering these models in various ways and turning their corpses into his works of art. Yeah, the guy was a psychopath. Things only got worse when he managed to manipulate his way into Union, a simulated reality created from a device called STEM. In this world, Valentini was able to gain abilities that complemented his obsession with capturing death on film. But let's not get things twisted. While Valentini was much more powerful inside of STEM and had abilities that allowed him to manipulate time by freezing and slowing it down for the perfect death shot, the guy was always crazy and obsessed with death long before he gained these abilities. Number 5, Leland Vanhorn, Condemned Criminal Origins. Throughout the events of Condemned Criminal Origins, you play as Ethan Thomas, an FBI agent who is hunting down serial killer X after he framed Thomas for the death of 2 agents. Leland Vanhorn, the true name of the serial killer X, has a unique style in the way he murders his victims and who he targets. See, Vanhorn only targets other serial killers. Yeah, he's pretty much the Dexter of the Condemned universe, except that Vanhorn is willing to kill innocent people too, and is sort of manipulated by an ancient cult, sort of. Yeah, it gets really confusing, but honestly, most of that is covered in the second game. Focusing on what Vanhorn does in the first game though, he targets serial killers. Specifically, his victims are killers of cold cases that Ethan Thomas was unable to solve. Vanhorn's style is also unique, as he gets a thrill out of killing his victims in the same way that they killed each of their victims. For example, the killer known as the Matchmaker liked to strangle female victims and then pose a male mannequin near her body. Another killer, the Torturer, preferred to not actually do the deed himself, but rather torture people to the point where they wanted to kill themselves. Vanhorn would use these same styles when killing each of the other killers, making him more of a vigilante than a serial killer, I guess. Still, Vanhorn is a fucked up individual, and even though most of his victims were far from innocent, he's also taken the lives of multiple people that weren't killers, and he's also got a thrill out of killing people, as he was a very sadistic person. Number 4, Walter Sullivan, Silent Hill 4, The Room. The main antagonist of Silent Hill 4 is arguably the best villain of the entire franchise. Seriously, Walter Sullivan isn't talked about enough, as he's a serial killer that's killed a lot of people, 19 of them to be exact. Yet, despite that, Silent Hill 4 feels like it's more Walter Sullivan's story than it is Henry's story, as we explore every single detail in Walter's past more than any other character in this game. As a baby, Walter was abandoned by his parents. This eventually led to him being raised at the Wish House Orphanage, which was located just outside of the town of Silent Hill. And guess who secretly ran a Wish House? The Order. This is the same cult led by Dahlia Gillespie, the main antagonist of the first Silent Hill game. In fact, she had met with Walter Sullivan multiple times as a boy, and it was her that sort of planted the seed for Walter to commit the murders he did, as he believed it was a ritual that would reunite him with his mother. Anyways, this ritual was known as the 21 Sacraments, and it's what motivated Walter to murder 10 people while he was alive. Then, after almost being caught by the police, Walter framed someone else and then took his own life, even though that's sort of kind of a mystery exactly how that went down, but regardless, Walter became the 11th victim. He became his own victim, essentially. You know, like the 11th sacrifice, whatever. Anyways, he did this in a separate ritual that would allow him to continue to sacrifice even more victims until he eventually made it to number 19, even in death. Then at the end of the game, based on the actions of the players, Walter Sullivan could even potentially achieve his goal and complete the 21 sacraments, allowing him to live in the apartment forever that he believed was his mother in some weird, disturbing way. Peachy. Number 3, Junko Enoshima, Danganronpa. Given the title of Ultimate Despair, even as a young girl, Junko was a completely disturbed individual. From the moment that she was born, Junko believed her birth was a mistake, as her and her twin sister faced horrible circumstances, such as being homeless for long periods of time throughout most of her childhood. As a child, though, she became bored and frustrated with the world, and for this reason, she became obsessed with a single emotion and feeling: despair. This obsession is what led to Junko doing horrible things and filling the entire world with despair. She started out by murdering the boy that she fell in love with for the mere fact that she wanted to feel the despair of losing him. Then as a high school student, she set up a plan to create the tragedy, an event that would shock the world and fill it with despair. To do this, she put a fellow student of hers inside of a trap and forced the class to watch her brutally die, thus brainwashing the classmates and making them her puppets. Then she set up a killing game that would force students to kill each other in order to escape the school that they were trapped in. During this time, she also murdered her twin sister because, again, she loved her sister so much and she clearly wanted to feel the despair of losing her. Junko Enoshima was a violent young woman who, even after her death, an execution that she herself wanted and chose to carry out, will live on in other ways, rather that was in the form of an AI created with her personality to host another killing game, or in the form of her minions that she brainwashed prior to her death. Yeah, she's one fucked up person, and she did all of this for the mere purpose of feeling despair and filling the world with despair. Disturbed individual is kind of an understatement in that regard, isn't it? Number 2, William Afton, Five Nights at Freddy's. So I won't sit here and pretend to be an expert on the FNAF lore, but one thing that I do know is that William Afton, owner of the Five Nights at Freddy's restaurant chain, is easily one of the most disturbing serial killers on today's list. Why? Because his victims were mostly children. Yeah, this sick freak was obsessed with killing children, and not only did he kidnap and murder them, but he would trap their bodies inside of the animatronics of his restaurants to hide their bodies, essentially trapping their souls. There's so much more to him than this, but honestly, I feel like I would be doing a disservice to FNAF fans if I tried to dive deeper into everything William Afton did, as the lore is just so heavy and I'll probably get it wrong. But what I will say is that beyond the horrible things that he did when he was alive, his torment continued as Springtrap, an animatronic version of his bunny costume, and this version of Afton was just as dangerous, if not more. Number 1, Eddie Gluskin, Outlast the Whistleblower. Also known as the Groom, Eddie Gluskin is one of the many patients of Mount Massive Asylum that completely went nuts and started to kill people when the patients broke free prior to the events of the first game. He's one of the main antagonists of the Whistleblower DLC, and I would also argue that he's the most intimidating stalker enemy of the entire franchise. Which says a lot, by the way, because this franchise is crawling with iconic stalker enemies. While he was a serial killer before he ended up in the asylum as he brutally killed women, it wasn't until he ended up in Mount Massive and broke free that he became much, much worse. Here, he became obsessed with creating the perfect bride by capturing men that he found beautiful, cutting off their male features, if you know what I mean, and then performing operations like stuffing his victims' chests to create boobs, therefore creating the perfect bride. Even through all of this though, he would never be happy with his creations, and after all the torturing he would do to his victims when trying to create his perfect bride, he would then kill them when he wasn't happy with the result. The dude was absolutely insane, which makes sense. He was locked up inside of an insane asylum. But the worst part is that he did this to a ton of different people, and I mean a ton of patients, doctors, scientists, and guards. I mean, just look at this scene, which showcases a lot of his victims, and this isn't even including the victims that he had that aren't in this room, or the women that he killed before ending up in Mount Massive Asylum, which we don't even know what number that is, actually. Yeah, pretty unbelievable. So when you combine his motives, his methods, and the fact that he's absolutely one of the most terrifying stalker enemies in a horror game, then yeah, he clearly deserves the number 1 spot for most disturbing serial killer in a horror game. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is Eddie Gluskin the most disturbing serial killer in a horror game, or is there someone else that deserves that title? Let me know down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Games. Take care.